Welcome to the Bible Forum. I am Warren Sprouse, and I'm here every Sunday night from 8 to 10 p.m. to help you understand life from a biblical perspective. I'd like to talk to you tonight about the new American culture. We just went through a Thanksgiving celebration. It's supposed to remind us of God's care and God's protection. It is traced back to a small group, less than 80 souls, probably only half that number, in a new and very different land. We call them Puritans. Off course by as much as 1,000 miles. Forced to land in a hostile environment. It was late in the year. They couldn't keep this up. Grateful to God for what they had. They tested communal living. And communal living served, with the weather and the circumstances, to kill off half their population in a very short period of time. So they switched. And they went to a personal responsibility system. You take care of yourself, I'll take care of myself. We're talking about the growing of crops and killing of animals for meat and food and shelter and things of that nature. And as soon as they switched to a personal responsibility system, the group began to thrive. They thrived enough that they were able to share. In 1776, a nation was conceived like no other nation on the earth. Exists still to this day like no other nation on earth. A nation founded upon biblical principles. Basic among them is the idea of making citizens the nation. It's called a republic, a system without a monarch, where the people have the power and the leaders responsible to the people. A system of government where the primary positions of power are not inherited. A system wherein the head of state is not a monarch. And guess what? It worked. Now, it didn't work perfectly. It still doesn't. And our critics are quick to point out the fallacies, the foibles, and the failures. But it worked, and it worked better than any form of government known to mankind. And 242 years later, it is proving just how well it works. In our world, every marker of progress is up. Our economy has rebounded in the last 2 years. People are encouraged. Hope has returned. But what malignity lurked, continues to lurk in our society? It's called the depravity of men's souls. We only have to turn on the television, on the internet, check our tweets and so forth, and we can see it. Case in point is Chicago. Chicago has 2.7 million people in their city. There are 30,154 violent crimes committed every year. There are 88,077 property crimes every year. 118,231 crimes in total. And yet Chicago is safer than 8% of the country. That's 43.71 crimes per resident per year. 765 murders, 1,592 rapes, 11,970 robberies, 15,827 assaults, and probably less than 3% of the population is responsible for all of it. 3% of Chicago, about 8,000 souls. But consider, 24 American cities have a higher crime rate than Chicago. Now, the FBI rates these sorts of things. They have statistics published for 2015, and they measure murders per 100,000 people. They found 24 American cities with a higher rate than Chicago. And Pew Research claims crime rates in America have dropped steadily over the last 20 years. Crime rate is now 50% less than it was. What's happening here? Well, what's happening here is the heart of mankind, of human beings, which the Bible describes as being the most deceitful and destructive thing on the planet in the universe, probably. With no control, no effective control, this is what it does. When the family system breaks down and children are raising themselves, nobody there with enough authority or gumption to say, stop, you can't do that, and they evolve. And eventually they find that it's easier to take your money and your property than it is to go out and earn money to get their own. And when you don't have enough police to stop them, and there's never going to be enough police to stop them, they increase. Now, consider how many Americans either reject, resist, or create alternative realities, or maybe just simply pretend that what the Bible teaches is not true. And they look at it and say, as we evolve, we have better technology, we have we got indoor plumbing and central heat, and we're living, so humanity's getting better, right? No, it's not. It's getting more comfortable, but it's not getting better. Why? Well, an argument can be made that mankind is really no worse than it's ever been. The problem is our society has generally rejected God, but that's normal. Our society has openly rejected God. Probably more than half of our society, some might say more, have rejected God altogether, meaning they do not have respect for the God of the Bible, for his principles, his ideals, values, standards, and so forth. They say these things are not important. In fact, some would point to these things and say they're actually destructive. We have a plethora of young adult males who are not working at all. We have young adult females raising children on their own. The family structure is gone, even where there is an intact family, husband, wife, children. The structure is gone. Family values are gone. Community values went right behind them. Social values, gone. Every person is now being encouraged to develop their own values, their own standards. Does any of that sound familiar? What was the problem in Israel during the days of the judges? In Judges chapter 17, verse 6, every man did that which was right in his own eyes. In fact, wherever evil raises its ugly head, that phrase shows up in the book of judges. Initially, when Israel had no king, they had judges. In 1 Kings 15, King David is said to have done that which was right in the eyes of the Lord. A little bit later on, we read about King Asa, who did the same, and Jehoshaphat, and Hezekiah, and Josiah. But the Bible says there came a time when the kings of Israel did not that which was right in the eyes of the Lord. And as a result, Israel suffered greatly. Kings Rehoboam, Abijah, Jehoram, Ahaziah, Ahaz, Ammon, Jehoiakim, and others. The difference? The good kings did that which was right in the eyes of the Lord. The society flourished, was safer, did better, followed usually by a king who did not recognize God and do things right in his sight, began to lead Israel according to their own thoughts, values, desires, and so forth. And the whole society went down. A new king would come in and he would honor God and do the things that were right, and the society would come back up again. It's no different here. The children raised during the Great Depression era bore children who were largely self-oriented, having been given just about everything they wanted. I've got to back that up because I missed a sentence. The children of the Great Depression bore children. This would have been in the 50s, no, in the 60s. Depression era people, children born in Depression, very responsible crowd, they bore children that were not. They were self-oriented. They had been given about everything they wanted. They were living with parents who grew up with nothing. They were wanting their children to have more. They wanted them to have every modern convenience. And those children raised a whole generation who did not know God. We're talking about the children who were born, if you have to put labels on, or time periods on it, probably children who were born in the late 70s and 80s into the early 90s. Those children, as they grew up, didn't know God. God had been taken out of the school. God had been taken out of the world, the discussion of the world. And they had been raised by parents who did not know how to raise children. Their parents, largely, in trying to give them everything they never had, created little monsters in a sense. And now you've got children, grandchildren of Depression era people who both mom and dad are out of the house working, and they're working full-time jobs, which means they are out for about 50 hours a week. Mom is now able to control which child gets born and which child does not get born. We're talking abortion here. We have a father who is willingly turning over family authority to mom. Moms know more about how the family should run. Dads do a great disservice to mom and to the family when they back out. Trust your wife, trust mom to know how to handle children and the things of the house. But don't just say, okay, that's yours and I'm out. That doesn't work. So we got mom and dads going in different directions. The grandchildren of these baby boomers grew up not knowing God. By the turn of the century, America had a dominant society that did not know God. What did that do? Well, it spawned a value system that is largely relative. We don't live in an absolute world anymore. These people had no problem living contrary to God's word, nor did they have a problem living contrary to Americans' traditional values. Nor did they give any weight to the values by which anyone can succeed. In their mind, success just comes when you do stuff. It doesn't really matter what you do or how you do it. And when all that came down around their ears, they blamed the government. They blamed the church. They blamed the societal parents who clearly didn't understand how life works. Without objective moral values, they gravitated to anyone or anything that either gave them what they wanted or promised to do so. President Ronald Reagan, President John Kennedy were not as far apart as President Obama and President Trump. And therein is the snapshot. Bill Clinton was the transitional president, transitioning from the values Americans had always embraced to a new pop star president who could do just about anything he wanted with no consequences. Here we are, 20, 30 years later, and he's starting to feel the consequences. But Bill Clinton is credited with two major accomplishments. He presided over the longest peacetime economy in American history. And he also signed into law the North American Free Trade Agreement. The first of these he owes to Ronald Reagan. The second has proven to be one of the worst agreements we've ever seen. And of course there's Monica Lewinsky, who's now back in the news, having written a somewhat salacious book about her time with Clinton. No one wants to know about her childhood. No one wants to know about her recent life, what she's doing now. If she had not been sexually involved with a sitting president, no one would know her name outside of her close friends and family. The book she has written is part therapy, and it's also part financial security. And there's a large segment of our population that just wants to know. Well, did you know FDR had a mistress? And America largely did not know. It was deliberate, since decent people didn't do such things. And if they did, they kept it to themselves. It was a secret. It was private. And the press didn't write about it. Today, if you don't have a sexual history, you're probably not anyone who matters, at least not to millennials. The nighttime shows are billed as entertainment, but they're filled with scantily clad women and salacious comedy antics. Take these away and the ratings would plunge, and they wouldn't be here anymore. Now even respectable news and academic women are invited to come and sit on the couch, and they strip down for that. Have you noticed? It's called evening wear. But they have trouble sitting without showing off stuff. And they try to show off as much as they can. We are a people who are doing that which is right in our own eyes. The generations characterized this way in the Bible are Jews who did not have a king. But Proverbs 12 verse 15 tells us that only a fool relies on this subjective standard. Why? Because they have rejected wise counsel, choosing their own values over that of anyone else, including God. I would add especially God. And where does all that come from? Where does that all lead? Well, we'll talk about it. Stay tuned.